Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Ryan Carter, a successful lawyer in his early 40s, walked through the bustling streets of New York City, his mind focused entirely on the cases ahead. His sharp, calculating demeanor had earned him a reputation as one of the city's best defense attorneys. But today, something was different. Today, he was facing a challenge unlike any other one that involved not just his career, but his heart. His phone buzzed with a reminder of the meeting he had scheduled for later that afternoon. It was with Maya Bennett, a young woman whose life had just been turned upside down. Ryan stepped into his office, adjusting his tie, the weight of the day's decisions already pressing on him. Maya was already waiting in his conference room, sitting nervously, her eyes darting around the space. Her appearance didn't match the high-stakes case she was involved in. Dressed in modest, second-hand clothing, she looked every bit the part of a woman caught in a storm she could never have predicted. Maya, who had been living a quiet life, found herself at the center of a legal nightmare after the sudden death of her estranged father. To her shock, she discovered that her father's will had an unusual clause: she could only inherit his vast fortune if she was married. With no fiancé and no immediate prospects, Maya's world began to crumble. Desperate and running out of options, she had turned to Ryan for help, though she had no idea what his offer would be. Ryan knew he had to act fast. Her inheritance was in jeopardy, and without it, she would lose everything. He wasn't sure why he had agreed to take on her case, but there was something in Maya's demeanor, her quiet strength, that pulled at him. He paused, glancing at her across the table. After a few moments of silence, he spoke. Maya's brow furrowed, clearly confused. Maya blinked, processing the words. She knew she had no choice, but something in her gut told her this was a far more complicated situation than she could have imagined. Ryan's offer wasn't romantic, it wasn't about love. It was simply a legal contract, a way to protect her. But deep down, she wasn't sure if she could trust him. Could she really marry a man like him, a stranger, just to secure her future? Ryan could see the hesitation in her eyes. He had anticipated it. This wasn't a decision anyone would make lightly. But he also knew this was her only chance. Maya glanced down at her hands, her mind racing. This was not the life she had imagined. But her father's fortune was on the line, and she couldn't afford to lose it. Finally, she nodded, making the decision that would change everything. As the days passed, the two of them navigated through the awkwardness of their arrangement. The wedding was a small, private affair, held in a courthouse. Neither of them expected it to change anything, but something began to shift. The more time they spent together, the more Ryan saw the depth of Maya's character. She was far more than just a woman in need of a contract. She was strong, kind, and resilient in ways that Ryan had never expected. He began to feel something stirring inside him, something he thought he had buried long ago. But Maya, for all her outward strength, struggled with the idea of being in a marriage that was essentially a lie. She had grown to admire Ryan, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something more than just his cold, businesslike exterior. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, not yet. Little did they both know, the journey they had started as strangers bound by a legal contract was about to turn into something far deeper than either of them could have ever imagined. Ryan sat across from Maya, his fingers drumming lightly on the polished wood of the desk. It was their second meeting, but it felt like so much more. Maya had barely spoken since their last conversation, her eyes clouded with confusion and uncertainty. She had come to Ryan for help, but the weight of his proposal was starting to sink in. Was she really about to marry a man she barely knew, just for the sake of securing her future? Ryan, on the other hand, seemed calm, too calm for someone who had just proposed such an unusual arrangement. He wasn't interested in her past, her emotions, or anything beyond the paperwork. To him, it was just a transaction. But as Maya looked at him now, she saw something in his eyes, something more than just business. A faint flicker of something human. Could it be guilt? Or was it just the way he carried himself? The same way someone carries a heavy burden and refuses to let it show? She wasn't sure. But in that moment, she realized that the man in front of her was not just a lawyer. He had his own story, and it was as complicated as her own. Maya shifted in her chair, breaking the silence. Ryan looked up from his paperwork, his expression unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. He spoke with such conviction that it almost sounded too easy. Maya felt a tight knot form in her stomach. Could it really be that simple? A marriage with no real commitment, no emotional connection? She couldn't help but wonder how anyone could live with such a cold, transactional view of life. And yet, here she was, about to become a part of it. Her gaze drifted to the paperwork on the desk, the weight of her father's will still hanging over her like a dark cloud. She could feel the pressure building in her chest. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about her future. A future that she wasn't sure she could navigate on her own. Ryan's offer was her only way out. She had no other choice. She swallowed hard, the words almost catching in her throat. Ryan's eyes softened, but only for a brief moment. Ryan's cold, matter-of-fact tone hit Maya harder than she expected. She felt a pang of something deep inside her. Was it regret? Was she really going through with this? But she had no choice. Her father's inheritance meant everything to her. Without it, she would have nothing. No home, no future. She exhaled slowly, pushing away the doubt that threatened to cloud her mind. There was no room for hesitation now. This was the only option. This was the only way she could survive. And yet, as she looked at Ryan, something deep within her stirred. She hadn't expected this arrangement to feel so personal. They were still strangers, and yet this deal was about to change both of their lives forever. As Maya reached for the pen, she caught a glimpse of Ryan's face. His eyes, usually so composed and cold, now seemed to show a flicker of something else, something softer. For the first time since their meeting, Maya saw the faintest trace of vulnerability in his expression. Could he have doubts, too? Was this really just about business for him? She signed the contract, her heart pounding in her chest. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. Ryan watched as Maya signed the papers. He could feel the weight of the moment settle around them. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. Something was shifting, something he hadn't anticipated. He had made a choice. A choice to protect her, to help her. But in doing so, he had also unknowingly opened a door to a future he hadn't prepared for. As Maya stood to leave, Ryan couldn't help but wonder what this fake marriage would truly become. Would it remain a contract? Or would it evolve into something neither of them could control? He watched her walk out of his office, the door closing softly behind her. For the first time in a long time, Ryan found himself questioning everything he had believed about his own life. Was this truly just business? Or had something deeper already begun to grow between them? Ryan ran a hand through his hair, trying to push away the thoughts that suddenly crowded his mind. He had made a deal, and that was all it was supposed to be. No emotions. No complications. But as the silence of the office settled around him, he knew that neither of them would be able to walk away unchanged. And so, the story began. Two people, bound by a contract, yet already facing a future that neither of them could predict. A future that would test not only their legal agreement but their hearts as well. It had been a week since Maya had signed the papers. The reality of her decision began to settle in, heavier with each passing day. As promised, Ryan had kept his distance. They lived separate lives, their marriage nothing more than a piece of paper. Maya found herself caught in the whirlwind of managing her newly acquired wealth, attending events she never dreamed of, and keeping up with the demands of a world she was not prepared for. But it wasn't the money that weighed on her mind. It was the coldness of the arrangement, the emptiness that followed her everywhere she went. Ryan, on the other hand, remained as distant as ever. He continued his work, staying focused on the law, the contracts, the cases. Maya's case was practically closed, the inheritance now hers, but their fake marriage had not yet run its course. He had kept his word, no strings attached. And yet, every time he saw Maya, something stirred in him that he could not ignore. Maya was standing in front of a grand mirror at one of the galas she was forced to attend. She adjusted the strap of her dress, the glittering fabric catching the light in an almost painful way. It was the kind of event where everyone knew everyone else, where appearances mattered more than anything else. She felt out of place, and yet, there she was, the wife of Ryan Carter, a man who had become a stranger to her. Their brief exchanges were polite, but cold. He had no interest in getting to know her beyond the marriage contract. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want him to. She sighed, looking at her reflection, the weight of her loneliness hitting her in a way she hadn't expected. She was surrounded by people, yet she had never felt so isolated. The life she had imagined for herself simple, free of complications seemed a distant dream now, overshadowed by this cold, calculated arrangement with Ryan. Ryan, meanwhile, stood across the ballroom, scanning the room as his sharp eyes caught every detail. He was surrounded by his usual crowd, wealthy elites, business partners, people who were always one step ahead, always a part of the game. He was good at this game, but tonight, something was off. His eyes wandered through the crowd, stopping when they landed on Maya. She was standing near the entrance, looking more out of place than anyone else in the room. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and for a split second, Ryan's perfectly composed expression faltered. It was a fleeting moment, but it lingered in his mind. Maya had always been a mystery to him. He had hired her to help with a legal problem, offered her an escape, and she had taken it without hesitation. But somewhere between signing the papers and now, he realized that there was more to her than he had first assumed. She wasn't just another case or another asset to be managed. She was a person, with emotions, with dreams that didn't include him. He found himself walking toward her, his footsteps purposeful but slow. As he approached, Maya looked up at him, her face a mix of surprise and exhaustion. She had seen him across the room, but hadn't expected him to come over. Ryan's gaze softened for just a second, but it was gone before Maya could fully read it. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, something she had hidden well since their first meeting. He had been so focused on the legal aspects of their arrangement that he hadn't noticed the loneliness creeping in. Maya shook her head, a small laugh escaping her lips. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but of resignation. Ryan nodded, sensing the truth in her words. Maya wasn't just playing a role for the public, she was trying to convince herself that this new life was something she had control over. But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that, deep down, she was still looking for something more. Something real. Maya's eyes flickered with something between confusion and hope. She wasn't sure what to say, or what Ryan meant. Their marriage had started as a way out of a legal nightmare, and now, here they were, standing in a room full of people, pretending it was real. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't just a lie. Maybe, despite everything, there was something genuine between them. Ryan looked at Maya one last time, his gaze lingering longer than it should have. The cold, professional distance that had been there since their marriage contract began was starting to crack. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face it, but it was becoming impossible to ignore. And as the night went on, both of them felt the shift, though neither one could quite admit it. The fake marriage they had entered into was slowly starting to feel more like a real connection. Neither of them knew what would happen next, but they both sensed that they were no longer just playing a part. It had been a few more weeks since that night at the gala, and despite the distance they kept from each other, Maya could feel the subtle changes happening between her and Ryan. It was hard to ignore the growing tension in the air, the way his eyes lingered on her just a little too long, the way his voice softened whenever he spoke to her. Maya found herself thinking about him more often than she wanted to admit. The thought terrified her. She had entered this marriage with a clear, cold objective to secure her inheritance and escape the nightmare her father's will had left behind. But now, she wasn't so sure. Was she just fooling herself, or was there something more to this fake marriage than either of them had expected? Ryan, for his part, was struggling too. He had built walls around himself, carefully crafted to keep others at a distance, and he had kept Maya at arm's length from the beginning. But in the quiet moments when he was alone in his office or walking through the empty halls of his apartment, couldn't shake the thought of her. There was something about Maya. Something raw and real. She wasn't like the other women he was used to. She didn't care about his wealth or his status. She was different, and that difference began to break through the walls he had so carefully constructed. One evening, Ryan found himself on the phone with a client, his mind half on the conversation and half on the thoughts of Maya that had begun to consume him. As he finished the call, he glanced at the clock. It was late. He hadn't seen Maya in a couple of days. He knew she was staying in the guest wing of his penthouse, a space that was as detached as their marriage had been. But tonight, something felt different. He stood up, the decision to speak to her coming to him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He walked down the hallway toward her room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet apartment. As he reached the door, he hesitated, his hand hovering over the knob. What was he doing? He had never been the type to chase after anyone, especially not someone in his own home who was just a contractual obligation. But this was different. Maya was different. Taking a deep breath, he knocked softly. When he heard her voice call out from inside, he opened the door slowly. Maya was sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes wide as she looked up at him. She had obviously not been expecting him, but she didn't seem surprised either. There was something about the way she looked at him that made Ryan's chest tighten. Ryan stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar. He hadn't planned on being here, but now that he was, he didn't know how to back out. Maya's gaze softened slightly, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Maya raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. She had gotten used to the distance between them, and she hadn't expected him to come to her of all people. Ryan stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. He had come this far, he couldn't just leave now. Maya stared at him for a moment, her mind racing. She had never expected Ryan to ask her such a question. They had lived in the same space for weeks, but he had never once shown any interest in how she felt. He had always kept everything strictly professional, but now there was something different in his eyes. Ryan could see right through her. He had known her long enough to recognize when she was hiding something, but he didn't push her. Instead, he moved to sit next to her on the bed, the proximity between them now more intimate than ever. She looked at him, her face unreadable. For a moment, Ryan was afraid that she would pull away, that she would retreat into the walls she had built for herself. But instead, she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. Ryan's heart clenched. He had known there was more to Maya than the strong, stoic woman she had shown him. But hearing her admit it, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, made him realize just how much he had underestimated her. For the first time, Maya looked at him as if she saw him for who he really was. Not the lawyer who had arranged their marriage for the sake of business, but someone who understood the weight of loneliness. Someone who, despite everything, cared. As she met his gaze, something shifted between them. It was subtle, but unmistakable. For the first time since they had met, Maya felt like she wasn't just playing a part in Ryan's life. And for the first time, Ryan realized that he didn't want her to be just a part of his life, he wanted her to be everything. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. But in the silence, they both knew one thing: their fake marriage had just become something real. Something neither of them was prepared for, but something they both needed. It had been a few days since Ryan and Maya's conversation in her room, but the tension between them had shifted. There was still an air of formality, but something more genuine lingered in their interactions. Every time their eyes met, there was a flicker of something unspoken, something more than the marriage they had agreed to. Ryan had kept his distance, but there were moments, like when their hands brushed while passing a folder or when their gazes lingered just a second longer than necessary, that made Maya wonder if Ryan was feeling the same pull she was. But despite the growing connection, Maya couldn't escape the nagging voice in her mind. This was still a marriage of convenience, wasn't it? A contract that bound them together in name only. She had no right to get attached, and she couldn't afford to let herself fall for him. Ryan had made it clear that this was about business, and she had to stick to that. She couldn't risk complicating things further. Ryan, on the other hand, was starting to struggle with his own emotions. He had built a career on keeping his personal life separate from his professional one, on not getting involved with anyone. But every time he looked at Maya, something inside him shifted. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. He wasn't supposed to care. But the more he spent time with her, the more he realized that the lines between their fake marriage and reality were blurring. It all came to a head one afternoon when Ryan found himself in his office, pacing in front of the large windows overlooking the city. The silence of the room felt oppressive, and the weight of his thoughts was heavy on his shoulders. He couldn't stop thinking about Maya, the way she had looked at him that night in her room, the vulnerability in her eyes that she had never shown anyone else. It made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, a connection. But he couldn't figure out what it meant. Was this just a temporary lapse in judgment, or was it something more? His phone buzzed, breaking him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Maya. "Ryan, I need to talk to you." He stared at the message for a moment, his chest tightening. He had been waiting for this moment, for her to finally acknowledge what had been growing between them. But now that it was happening, he wasn't sure he was ready. What if this was the moment she decided to back out? What if she realized the marriage wasn't worth it? What if she had figured out that he was just as lost as she was? With a deep breath, Ryan quickly typed back, "I'm here. Come by whenever you're ready." A few minutes later, the door to his office opened, and Maya stepped in. She looked as composed as ever, but there was a softness in her eyes that Ryan hadn't noticed before. She closed the door behind her and stood there for a moment, as if unsure of how to begin. Ryan motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing. "Ryan, I've been thinking a lot about this, about everything," Maya began, her voice steady but uncertain. "I know we agreed this would be a business arrangement, but I can't help but feel. I don't know, confused." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. She was finally acknowledging what they had both been trying to ignore. "I'm not sure what I feel anymore," Maya continued, her voice quieter now. This arrangement has changed things. I didn't expect to feel this way. And I can't just go on pretending that it's all business, that I don't care." Ryan stood up, his chest tightening. He had been expecting this conversation, but hearing the words out loud felt like a punch to the gut. He had kept his emotions in check for so long, but now, with Maya standing there, so open and vulnerable, it felt impossible to hold back. "Maya," Ryan said softly, walking toward her, "I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't ignore it anymore either." Her eyes searched his, and for a moment, it felt like the entire world stood still. The weight of their unspoken feelings hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. "I didn't expect this," Ryan continued, his voice low. "I didn't expect you. But I can't pretend anymore either. This wasn't supposed to be anything but a contract. But now I'm not so sure." Maya took a step closer to him, her heart racing in her chest. This was the moment they both feared, the moment they would have to confront their feelings. She reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. Her touch sent a shock through him, and for the first time in a long while, Ryan felt something real. "So what does this mean for us?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan looked down at her hand on his arm, and then back up into her eyes. He knew the answer, even if he wasn't ready to say it aloud. "I don't know yet," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm willing to find out." And just like that, everything changed. The boundaries they had set up, the walls they had built around themselves, began to crumble. There was no going back now. They had crossed a line, and neither of them knew where it would lead. But one thing was certain: their marriage, once nothing more than a business transaction, had now become something real. It had been a week since Ryan and Maya's conversation, and things between them had shifted in ways neither of them had expected. The space between them felt different now, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken emotions. They were no longer just two people bound by a legal contract. Something more was beginning to form, something neither of them could ignore. Despite their attempts to keep things professional, every glance, every interaction seemed to carry a weight that was impossible to escape. Maya had tried to focus on her responsibilities, now that she had full control over her father's estate. The inheritance was finally hers, and with it came a whole new set of challenges: meetings, decisions, public appearances, all of which had started to feel like an endless cycle of obligations. But no matter how hard she tried to bury herself in the world of business and finance, her thoughts kept drifting back to Ryan. She found herself thinking about their last conversation, about how vulnerable he had allowed himself to be, how much he had admitted, and how different he seemed now compared to the man she had first met. He wasn't the cold, detached lawyer she had imagined. And yet, Maya still couldn't shake the feeling that, despite everything, their relationship was still founded on a contracted deal that had no room for emotions. One morning, Maya received a call from Ryan's office. She had been expecting it. Ryan had asked her to meet him at his office to discuss some recent developments with her estate. It wasn't unusual for them to meet over business matters, but today, something felt different. She knew she couldn't avoid him forever. Arriving at Ryan's office, Maya took a deep breath before stepping inside. Ryan was sitting behind his desk, looking as composed as ever, but his eyes softened when he saw her. For the first time since their initial meeting, there was no business mask, no cold professionalism. There was just Ryan, the man she was beginning to understand in a way she never expected. She nodded, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness. "Of course. You said it was important?" Ryan gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat. I wanted to talk to you about a few things concerning your father's estate. There are some changes in the will that we need to address." Maya sat down, but her mind was elsewhere. She was trying to focus on the legalities, but it was difficult when she could feel the tension in the air between them. Ryan's usual calm demeanor wasn't helping to calm her nerves. Instead, it seemed to amplify them. Maya nodded, trying to focus on the details, but her mind kept drifting to the man sitting across from her. She was acutely aware of the way his eyes occasionally flicked toward her, as if waiting for her to say something, to acknowledge the shift that had happened between them. The conversation went on for what felt like hours, and Maya found herself growing increasingly distracted. She hadn't intended for this to happen. She hadn't planned on becoming emotionally involved in any way. But the truth was, she had been feeling the pull of something more. Something she couldn't name. Finally, Ryan set the papers down, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "Maya," he said quietly, "there's something else I've been meaning to say." Maya's heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in a long while, she felt vulnerable. She wasn't sure what he was about to say, but the weight of his gaze made it feel like it was important. His words hung in the air between them, thick with meaning. Maya felt her pulse quicken, but she couldn't speak. She wasn't sure what to say, how to respond. For a long moment, Maya didn't know how to respond. Her mind was spinning, torn between her desire to stay distant, to protect herself, and the overwhelming emotions that Ryan's confession had stirred in her. She had never expected him to admit his feelings so openly. But now, in this moment, everything she thought she knew about their relationship seemed to be up for questioning. "Ryan," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly, I didn't know you felt that way." Ryan stood up and walked around the desk, his eyes not leaving hers. "I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I just want you to know that it's not just a contract anymore. And if you're willing, I'd like to find out what it could be. Together." His words left her speechless. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process what was happening between them. All she knew was that this wasn't what she had expected. It wasn't what she had planned. But maybe that was exactly what she needed. For the first time in their marriage, Maya felt like she wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, this fake marriage could turn into something real. For a few days after Ryan's confession, Maya's emotions were a storm she could not quiet. The words he had spoken in his office replayed in her mind again and again. This isn't just a contract anymore. Every time she thought about them, her heart beat faster, caught between disbelief and a fragile hope she did not dare to name. She had promised herself she would not fall for him, that she would keep things simple and safe. But Ryan had shattered that safety with one honest moment. And now, there was no going back. Ryan, too, found himself in unfamiliar territory. For the first time in years, his work did not hold his focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to Maya's quiet strength, her laughter that had slowly returned, her presence that filled the apartment in a way silence never could. He knew he had crossed the line the moment he confessed, but he did not regret it. What frightened him was the possibility that Maya did not feel the same way. The following evening, they attended another social event, a charity dinner organized by one of Ryan's law firm partners. The lights were soft and golden, and the air buzzed with the chatter of New York's elite. Ryan, as always, was composed, but Maya could feel the difference in him. His hand rested gently on her back as they entered, and when he looked at her, his eyes carried a quiet tenderness that no one else noticed. For the first time, Maya did not feel like a guest in his world. She felt like she belonged there, beside him. But that fragile peace did not last long. Across the room, Ryan's former client, a wealthy businesswoman named Clara Voss, approached with a sly smile. She had always admired Ryan's brilliance, but her admiration had curdled into jealousy when rumors of his marriage began to spread. She stopped in front of them, her tone honeyed but sharp. "So this is the woman who managed to tie down the famous Ryan Carter," she said, her gaze sliding over Maya with polite disdain. "Quite the achievement." Maya forced a smile, but her stomach twisted. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Clara," he said evenly, "this is my wife, Maya. And yes, she is extraordinary." His tone was calm, but the subtle edge in his voice made Clara's smirk falter. She murmured something about charity and excused herself, but the damage was done. Maya could feel the stares, the whispered gossip that followed them for the rest of the night. When they returned home, Maya finally let the tension spill out. "You do not have to defend me, Ryan," she said, her voice trembling. "I can handle people like her." Ryan turned to her, his expression softening. "I know you can. But you should not have to. You should not have to prove yourself to anyone." She looked away, her throat tightening. "That is easy for you to say. You belong in that world. I never will." Ryan stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "You belong with me, Maya. That is all that matters." The sincerity in his tone made her chest ache. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that their love, if that was what it was, could survive the scrutiny, the judgment, the lies that had built the foundation of their marriage. But deep down, fear lingered. What if this was all temporary? What if it all came crashing down the moment the truth came out? Ryan reached for her hand, his thumb brushing gently against her skin. "Do you trust me?" he asked softly. Maya met his gaze, her heart pounding. "I want to," she whispered. "I really want to." And in that moment, Ryan realized just how much he wanted her trust, how much he needed it. He had promised her a life free of complications, but now, he wanted to give her something else entirely, a life built on love, not contracts. But as he held her hand, unaware of the shadows that still lingered beyond their perfect facade, neither of them knew that their fragile happiness was about to be tested. The days following their heartfelt conversation were a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Ryan and Maya's connection had deepened, but neither of them was ready to fully embrace it. The walls they had built to protect themselves from the vulnerability of emotions were still standing, though slightly cracked. Maya found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the love she was starting to feel for Ryan with the fear that had been instilled in her for so long. She had never let herself fall this deeply, not even in her previous relationships. But now, with Ryan, everything was different. He was kind, attentive, and, for the first time, genuinely present. Yet, she couldn't help but wonder, was he truly falling for her, or was this all part of some deeper plan? One evening, as they prepared for another public event, a business gala Ryan had been invited to host, Maya couldn't ignore the unease that had taken root in her chest. They had agreed to attend together as a couple, but the closer they got to the event, the more she could feel the weight of the situation. She wasn't just his wife in name anymore. She was stepping into his world, one that seemed to demand more of her than she was ready to give. Ryan, always composed, sensed her hesitation as she stepped into the grand foyer of their penthouse. Her dress, elegant yet simple, caught the light, but there was something in her eyes of vulnerability he couldn't ignore. Maya nodded, but it was more out of habit than certainty. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." Ryan paused, studying her face for a moment. His instincts told him that something wasn't right, that the weight of their marriage, the pressure of it all, was starting to take its toll on Maya. The offer was tempting. She could feel the exhaustion in her bones, the constant pressure to keep up appearances. But she couldn't bring herself to stay home. She knew how important tonight was, not just for Ryan, but for both of them. This was the world he lived in, and she had to learn how to navigate it if she was truly going to be a part of his life. Ryan smiled and kissed her forehead, his eyes softening with an emotion Maya couldn't place. He was clearly aware of her inner turmoil, but he didn't push. He simply stood by her side, a quiet strength she had come to rely on. The evening was everything Maya had feared it would be. The room was full of influential figures from all corners of the city, business moguls, socialites, and politicians, each one of them sizing up the newest power couple in the room. Maya could feel the eyes on them as soon as they entered, her every movement scrutinized by strangers she would never see again. But it wasn't the whispers or the looks that unsettled her. It was the nagging thought that she didn't truly belong here, that she was still pretending, still living someone else's life. Ryan, ever the professional, was in his element. He greeted people, shook hands, and made the small talk that came so easily to him. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that, despite everything, she was still standing on the outside looking in. Later in the evening, as they made their way to the grand ballroom, Ryan turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost as if he had read her thoughts. Maya smiled, trying to hide her growing anxiety. "Yeah. Just a little overwhelmed, that's all." Ryan didn't push further. Instead, he gently guided her to the center of the ballroom, his presence a steady anchor in the sea of unfamiliar faces. As they stood together, the orchestra playing softly in the background, Maya felt something shift. The room, once filled with distant voices and overwhelming expectations, seemed to fade away. All that mattered, at that moment, was Ryan's hand on her waist and the steady rhythm of his breath. For the first time that night, Maya allowed herself to relax. The pressure, the fear, the doubts, they all faded into the background. She had no idea what the future held, but as she stood there, in Ryan's arms, she realized that she was no longer just playing a role. This marriage, this partnership, had become something real, something she could no longer deny. Ryan leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, "Thank you for being here with me." And in that moment, Maya realized she had already found her place in his world, not as a guest, but as a partner. The road ahead would still be uncertain, full of challenges and fears, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Together. Weeks passed, and Maya and Ryan's relationship continued to evolve. What started as a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience, had become something deeper, something neither of them had anticipated. The once clear lines they had drawn between their personal and professional lives were now blurred, and neither of them could ignore the growing connection that had taken root between them. But just as their bond seemed to solidify, a new challenge emerged, a challenge neither of them could have foreseen. One afternoon, Maya was in her office, reviewing the latest reports on her father's estate, when her phone rang. It was Ryan's assistant, telling her that he needed to see her urgently. The urgency in the assistant's voice sent a wave of anxiety through her, and without hesitation, Maya dropped everything and rushed to Ryan's office. When she arrived, she found Ryan standing by the window, looking out at the skyline. He turned as she entered, his face unreadable. There was something in his eyes, something that made her heart skip a beat. Ryan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's been a situation," he said, his voice low. "It's about the estate, Maya. There's a clause in your father's will that I didn't realize until now. One that could jeopardize everything we've worked for." Maya's stomach dropped. She had thought that everything was finally in order, that she was finally free from the weight of her father's legacy. But now, with Ryan's words hanging in the air, she felt the ground beneath her shift. Ryan walked over to the desk, pulling out a folder and handing it to her. "Your father's will includes a condition that requires both spouses to be in good standing with the family for a period of 5 years before the inheritance can be fully realized. If we don't meet this condition, the entire estate could be seized." Maya's mind raced. 5 years. The very thing that had bound her to Ryan in the first place was now a ticking clock hanging over them. She hadn't signed up for this, and yet, here was another complication in the already complicated life she had never asked for. Ryan continued, his voice steady but with a hint of frustration. "This clause was buried in the fine print. If we don't resolve it, your inheritance will be at risk. And everything we've built together, everything we've worked for could be destroyed." Maya felt her chest tighten. She had come so far. She had allowed herself to open up to Ryan, to trust him in ways she had never done with anyone before. And now, just as she was starting to believe in the possibility of a future together, the very thing they had built was threatened by an unseen clause in her father's will. Ryan reached out and gently placed his hand on hers. "You won't lose me, Maya," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll find a way to make it work." We've faced worse things than this. And we'll face it together. Maya looked up at him, her heart full of emotions she couldn't fully express. Ryan had always been the one with the answers, the one who knew exactly what to do. But now, she realized that this marriage, this partnership wasn't just about solving problems. It was about facing them together, no matter what. In that moment, Maya realized that their bond was stronger than any legal clause, any obstacle that could come their way. They had built something real together, something worth fighting for. And no matter what happened, they would continue to stand by each other's side. As they stood there, hand in hand, Maya felt a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: they would face it together. And that, in itself, was more than enough. Their journey had only just begun, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time, Maya felt ready to face whatever challenges came their way. Because, together, they could conquer anything.